It is week 2 of the Pantry Challenge here at the Hometown Homestead, and to say we've been busy is an absolute understatement. We baked all sorts of stuff, plus made this beautiful spatchcock chicken, semi-boneless on Thursday night. So if you're interested in seeing what all we've been up to, hang out because I think you're going to like what we have in store. In the intro, you caught me milling some wheat, and I did that for these beautiful muffins that we're starting off Monday morning with. I decided to go with muffins because we're heading out the door, and I wanted something that would be easy for the kids that are staying to eat, as well as easy for the kids that are headed with me to take in the car. So these muffins don't have any added fruit or berries. We've done that in the past, and my kids just don't like them as much. So this muffin itself is just a plain whole wheat muffin, and it is absolutely delicious. They have honey added, no sugar, and then we actually just throw them out here on the cooling rack out of the silicone baking trays so that they can cool, nothing sticks, and they are absolutely perfect and ready to go when we jump in the car. The kids that got the privilege of staying home with Nan got to eat them at home with a big, beautiful chunk of butter right on those beautiful muffins. Now, heading into the afternoon, it was so nasty outside. I don't know where you guys are at, but where we are this week has just been disgusting. So we are having a pot of chili. Now, this is chili that is using deer meat, which is something I wanted to work through in my pantry challenge, and I'm putting those frozen blocks right in my Instapot. And when I do that, I cook them for 18 minutes at high pressure and then just let it naturally release until I'm ready to handle it. Now at this point, the meat comes out in one big chunk and I'm just pulling out the rack, chopping it up, and letting it sear off the rest of the way to make sure everything's cooked through. Then I added some beans and some tomatoes and got a nice, beautiful pot of chili going that everybody enjoyed throughout the day as they were hungry. Some of my kids like some sour cream and cheese. A little bit of vinegar is a family secret, and that works for some and not for others. So I'm making the bowl for the little one here to get her over out of the way, and then I'm going to pull in the rest of the kids. Now, this one specifically loves to add some of the banana peppers that we grew in the garden this summer, so it's really just dependent on the child what they want to add in. While he's doing this, I am over at the stove. I actually pulled out some of the meat from the chili itself before I added any of the beans. So this chili itself is just going to be tomatoes, onions, and the meat. This is being topped with cheese and sour cream. I eat this on my carnivore diet, and then so does one of my other kiddos who isn't too big of a fan of beans. For me, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, but not for him. Hamburgers are a family favorite in my house, but when you're on the pantry challenge, running to the store to grab some buns isn't an option. Now, not that I like to do that typically, but sometimes in a pinch, I'll make that happen. Today, we are making buns from scratch because the kids are getting their wish and we're having some burgers for dinner. Now, as you can see, my little assistant here is all up in my business, which she typically is. She loves to help with whatever we have going on. So this morning, she's over in the flour and she's just being 2 years old. I am adding some yeast to my mix after I've got it started, and then I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like inside the pan here in a minute. But first, notice what she's doing. She's knocking the flour that came out of my grinder off on the floor. So one more project to clean up later. But now she's obviously being super curious, taking a quick look at what we have going on. Here is what she's seeing down inside. Now this batter just takes a little bit of time to come together and it forms a beautiful dough. I set that aside and let it rise for maybe an hour or so until it looks good. Now, in the meantime, this guy loves the kitchen. So he is making some of his famous cookies. This recipe came out of the America's Test Kitchen for Kids cookbook. It's a 3-ingredient cookie with sugar, eggs, and peanut butter. And I have to say, watching this footage back and editing it has been a great eye-opener over what exactly is going on in my kitchen when I'm turned the other direction. I didn't know he was using his dirty sugar spoon to scoop into the peanut butter and get out what he needed for the recipe. But, there you have it. So the kiddos are mixing up the cookies, and you're going to see here in a second that I'm going to try, I say try because you're going to see why, but I'm going to try to teach him exactly how to scoop out the cookies and make sure that they get good spacing on the tray. This is a lesson we've been working on for quite a while, and is yet to be mastered, but the end product always turns out great and we love them no matter what. Now, over beside him on the counter, you can see that my canner is back out. In the meantime, while we're doing these other projects, I have the rest of the pork that I canned up for my January project for Sutton's Days in the canner, going for round 2. If you haven't seen my January video or don't know what that is, there's a huge playlist from Sutton's Days that tells all about what's going on. You can also find the video that I did myself. I'll link it at the end. But there's a lot of amazing giveaways going on. Up to 3 different canners are being given away, as well as a whole bunch of prize packs. So if you haven't checked that out or you're interested in canning, make sure to check out what we have going on this month because it's really, really awesome. Amazing recipes are being shared and just great stuff going on. So here you can see little brother's coming in to see what's going on, and those cookies are getting awfully close. He did notice that one, went back and moved it, but you know, it just is what it is. We got some cookies that ended up growing together and still turned out absolutely beautiful. If you have somebody that is gluten-free or just a kid that's wanting to learn how to do a little bit more in the kitchen, these cookies are a great choice. And the America's Test Kitchen recipe book for kids has all of the recipes rated by their kind of by their skill level, so the kids can pick out recipes that they find interesting for them. Now, back to the buns over here while the cookies are in the oven. I'm going to pull out this dough and go ahead and start getting them shaped. While I'm doing that, you're going to see that I pull the dough out and then I'm going to weigh it. I don't always weigh, but I wanted to make sure since I was making these buns and they all needed to cook a little bit at the same time that they were pretty even. Now, here comes my little lady again. She is very handy with moving around what she wants, and she's pulling her chair up to get right up in the mix of what I have going on, like usual. So here we go. Oh, I kissed her and she wiped it off. Oh, even licked it off. How crazy is she? All right, so here we go with the dough. I'm portioning this out into 8 different individual buns, so we have enough for what we have going on here. We used 4 this night, and then we used 4 later in the actual video when you're going to see us pull out some of that pork that we had left over and make some barbecue pork sandwiches. So to make the buns, you just want to roll nice, tight little round balls, and then I'm just gently pressing the top down so that they flatten out. They do look a little bit round here, but they bake up really beautifully once I set them out over on the stove to get the warmth that's coming up from those cookies and complete their final rise. Now, you can see here my little one is absolutely interested in the flour and is going to make another mess in this room. But as long as I have her with me, I know what's going on and she's having a blast. I don't care if there's a little flour on the floor. She's learning, she's watching, and having a blast. So that's kind of my rule. Yes, we're going to get messy, but we're going to clean it up. And it's memories that they'll have forever of working with me in the kitchen. So now that the final rolls are being completed and going to go over on the stove to warm, the little one and I are going to go ahead and start cleaning up this gigantic mess that we created down below. The cookies are also about ready to come out of the oven. You can see right there what I was talking about, kind of like a nice big jigsaw puzzle, but we were able to cut them apart, and I should have got a clip of them breaking apart. They're very moist and delicious, so really, really good there. Now jumping back to the burger patties, I'm seasoning up what we have here with some salt and pepper, and then I'm making these patties and setting them out on my air fryer trays. I have done burgers many different ways, but one of my favorite ways is in the air fryer because I don't have a huge mess to contend with. So I have 2 different trays, and I'm going to actually flip them halfway through the cooking process, or should I say swap them, so that they get done evenly from top and bottom. And as you can see here, the buns turned out beautifully, and the kids were quite happy to go ahead and eat those burgers. The next morning's breakfast was just a whole bunch of leftovers, sausage, eggs, bagels, and cream cheese, whatever the kids wanted. Now what I'm doing is throwing a whole bunch of boneless, skinless chicken into the Instapot. We typically do not buy this, but my husband grabbed it by accident, so I have been using it to put in my canner so we have a bunch of meat ready to go on the shelf. If you're interested in that, stay tuned because I'll have a video on that coming soon. Now this is my famous coleslaw, as the cookbook that I'm going to show you in a minute says. This recipe comes from a family cookbook that my mom put together for us years ago. My kids absolutely love this coleslaw, and I make it for them on occasion, but it is not something that we do frequently because it does have some sugar in it, and I try to limit any added sugar to meals that we're eating. But this is absolutely delicious. So I chopped up a whole bunch of cabbage. You can see that I actually have the brown bowl going for coleslaw and a bowl behind it going for some sauerkraut that I will be making on an Azure Standard Hall prep and cook video that I have coming later. But in the meantime, I am getting some gloves on this little guy so they can head out in the snow. It is just a brutal week, y'all. I know that it is the same no matter where you are, but man, it has just been crazy. So here I am. I'm chopping up some frozen carrots. I absolutely love having frozen carrots on hand. You've seen me use them in a lot of different dishes, and here I am just using them straight from frozen. I'm chopping them up, and I'm going to throw them straight in this coleslaw. It also does call for some onion, but I am not adding that at this time because the kids don't always love that depending on how spicy or sweet my onion is. And right now I don't have anything sweet. It's just all kind of on the spicy side. So with that said, I'm going to finish chopping this up and then mix up a dressing that you'll see here momentarily. I'm using a powdered buttermilk that I love keeping on hand in the pantry. The reason I do that is so then I don't have to worry about any time when I want a recipe like this, whether we do or do not have milk on hand. We are not a family who typically drinks a lot of milk, although we do get some fresh cream on occasion and use that here around the house. But just to keep milk, I don't. So in the white bowl, you can see my buttermilk that I mixed up. I use that as a powder, and then I'm adding the other ingredients. We have salt, pepper. You're going to see lemon juice going in, as well as mayo. Now, the mayo is the end of our mayo stash, and I have purposefully run out of mayo because we have chickens now, and I'm so excited to make our own. We have been really stocked on mayo because I use it for a homemade dressing that we use a lot. So coming to the end of these jars is a good thing because I'm looking for better, cleaner ingredients at this point, but also means a shift in the process of how we do things around the house. I'm also adding some vinegar, as you'll see here, just to help give it a little bit of acidity, and that really makes a big difference. Now, as you can see, my little helper here loves touching every single spoon. This is part of the reason I think on this day she has 3 or 4 different outfits on. She changes as often as she gets dirty. She refuses to have anything on her. And, when you're up in the kitchen like this with mom at 2 years old, that's just going to happen. So again, emptying out the end of the mayo. I think the recipe called for a half cup. I just kind of eyeballed it here and used what we have left to make this dressing. Now we're going to give everything a really good stir and add it back to the coleslaw. Now this is earlier in the morning, so I'm not going to use this until the evening, but with having a couple hours for it to cool, I think the recipe actually calls for 2 hours. This gives me a little extra time to make sure that it's delicious and cold before we're going to serve it. So as you can see here, little one is going to finish off the dressing spoon because she really loves it. We're going to dump this all together and then put some plastic wrap on it, set it in the fridge until we're ready to go for the evening. With that complete, I was able to turn my attention back to the sauerkraut that I have in the making, giving it a little pounding here, as you can see, with a toss just to make sure that the moisture continues to draw out of that cabbage in order to make the best sauerkraut that I can get going. After the kitchen work was complete on those tasks, I decided to have a little bit of lunch for me. So here you're seeing my organic cream cheese, which I grabbed from Azure, as well as some sliced steak with some beautiful feta on top and melted butter. Now it's time for the dinner prep. And what I have here is some venison steak. I actually had mislabeled it. We pulled this portion of the animal ourselves before sending the rest off for processing. I had this marked as tenderloin. So my plan totally changed when I got into this and saw what was actually in the bag. So initially I was going to have seared tenderloin. That did not turn out. So I went ahead and cut this up into little pieces and decided to sear it off and make a deer fried rice with some rice that we have left over from a previous meal. So at this point, what you're seeing is my steak itself. I kept a little bit out for me. I'm going to flash fry off in some butter here and throw an egg in the pan so I can have that as well. Adding salt and pepper to both and getting a plate set aside for me before moving on to the rest of the family. Now, my little lady has something she calls tiny eggs, and she was in the background saying, I want tiny eggs. I want tiny eggs. So that's what you're seeing right here. She was recovering last week from a nasty tummy virus that took a whole lot out of her. So, as much as she wanted to eat, she was doing. And what I do here for her tiny eggs is just basically fry it up, pop the yolk, and then turn it over and chop it up. Not to be confused with scrambled eggs. She does not want them scrambled. She wants to call them tiny eggs, and then she eats them with just a little bit of a low sugar ketchup on top, which, whatever it takes to get it in her at this point. Like I said, she was really, really down. So she is starting her tiny egg here. And while I thought that was done, I decided to go ahead and get back on this deer. So I threw some oil in. I'm taking the deer that I've already got cut up, and we're getting that browned up. Like I said, I had the rice left over from last week. I had already fried it. So that made this process a whole lot easier once I realized I had to shift plans in the middle. This venison itself was actually a little bit juicy as I was trying to cook it out, and I wanted to make sure to get all of that liquid cooked off so I didn't have a nasty soggy rice in the end. So what you're seeing here is me making sure I get it all browned up. Then I'm going to scoop out the meat and wipe down the pan just to make sure that, like I said, that remaining liquid doesn't impact the final product. Now I'm throwing in extra butter and the fried rice that I had left over from last week while cracking another egg in the middle for a second round of mommy eggs or tiny eggs for the little one before mixing up everything that I have left in there, throwing the meat in, and putting a little bit more soy sauce back in to give some added flavor. More butter at the end. The kids loved it, and as you can see there, they were having some of that coleslaw with it, even though that wasn't quite what I had in mind when putting it all together. This is the next morning. I am sitting down at the same table where we have dinner, and I'm doing math with my oldest while the youngest his younger brother got himself a snack. And the girls decided that they needed some blueberries. So frozen blueberries are a snack that we have commonly around our houses specifically for the girls. They really love them. And I had somebody question last week what we do for snacks. Deer sausage, cheese, berries, all of those kinds of things, as well as chips and salsa. Now, this is lunch, and what I'm doing is throwing in some of that leftover pork that you guys saw me can up in my January video. I kept some out for that night. We had some dinner, and this was the remaining meat. I'm taking the pork and I'm adding a little bit of barbecue sauce and some water, setting it over on the stove to slowly simmer away while I go ahead and prep the rolls. Now, these buns I went ahead and cut in half, and I always brown up my buns. The kids just love them that way, and what I typically use is mayo. Now, if you remember, we had a little deal going with the mayo where I ended up finishing off the rest. So I was so excited to go ahead and make this mayo, and this ended up being an epic fail. I'm just going to cut to the chase. This was not something that I will be able to recreate in this exact way. So what you're seeing here, I cracked an egg into a jar. We added some salt, a little bit of Dijon mustard. I've seen both ways, whether you should use Dijon or regular. We went with Dijon here. And then I'm going to add some lemon juice before dumping in olive oil. I have seen a recipe that says you can do this all in the jar. There's no need to go slow and stream it in as long as you use an immersion blender. Well, that might be true, but that was not what happened for me, as you're about to see. I just don't know what happened. I promise you, though, I will redeem myself. I'm not going back to store-bought mayo when I have all of these beautiful eggs and I can control the ingredients myself. So at this point, you're supposed to dump the oil in, let it set for just a second, and the liquid is supposed to separate. So the oil is going to come to the top, which I'm going to show you here. All the rest of the ingredients are in the bottom. Putting the immersion blender all the way down to the bottom, you're supposed to blend this until it starts to look creamy, and then slowly pull the oil down into the mixture by slightly lifting. You're going to see that it started out beautiful, and I was feeling like this was awesome and totally going to be a win. The kids were so excited because this is something we've been talking about for quite a while, and I'm starting to get that beautiful creamy rise all the way up the jar, but it just never thickened, as you will see here in a minute. I mean, it is shockingly runny. I didn't actually let that prevent us from going ahead and using it to toast the buns, though, and they did end up beautiful, but as you're about to see right here, this stuff is just straight liquid. It's not much more thick than the oil itself. I know, right? We can't win them all, and this was my epic fail of the week for sure. So here I'm going to go ahead and just brush it on the buns and get them over on the grill so I can get them toasted up. During this whole time, it seems to have totally escaped me that the meat was over on the stove. So it was a really good thing I put it on a low simmer. Typically, I turn it up a little higher and plan to pull it off faster. But I had put those chunks in really cold, straight out of the fridge. And so everything was pretty solidified. When I pulled them off, it had perfectly shredded over on the stove. That is the beauty of having pork ready to go. It just makes the most amazing pulled pork sandwiches or carnitas or anything of that sort that you can make, which is why we like to keep it canned up. So here you're seeing me go ahead and shred it up with my forks before I'm going to go ahead and plate it up for the kiddos to have their beautiful sandwiches. Now, a couple of them decided to go ahead and pull out some sauerkraut, which, side note, you can see back there in the back, I have fermenting my next 3 jars. But we're going to pull out some sauerkraut and put it on top of these. You can see how beautiful that turned out. The kids absolutely loved it. Extras for the guy in the back. Lots of happy kids on this one. They love anything with barbecue sauce, of course, and any homemade bun is great. All right, now, as for my win of the week, you're going to see it right here. This is something that is really cool. We've done spatchcock chicken in the past. I've actually done it myself, where I just cut out the backbone, which I've seen a lot of people do, and shove it down to make it a little bit more flat for the pan. Now, in the past, my husband is actually a product packaging designer, and he had been given a sample of a spatchcock chicken, semi-boneless, that one of his customers was considering prepping for the store. And we loved it. We loved how flat it got. It grilled up beautifully because of how the bones weren't in the meat itself. So when I did it the other way, while it was great, it wasn't quite what we were used to. And so I actually watched the Bearded Butcher's channel with my kids quite a bit, and they recently did a spatchcock, or we recently saw it, where they made it semi-boneless, which is what I'm showing you here. I can tell you, if you haven't ever watched the Bearded Butcher channel, it's almost mesmerizing to watch them cut that meat. And as you can see, I'm struggling a little bit more than they do. I'm going to blame it on the knife because I haven't bought their awesome knife that they use on everything that they're chopping up. But in reality, this is my first time ever trying to pull the rib cage out of a chicken, and it took me a little bit of work to get it done. That said, can you see how flat this is getting? It's totally amazing, and it grills up amazing if you put it outside, but we're doing this one inside. The weather is just too gross for me to consider making anything outside right now. So with this whole chicken bone that you see me pull out there, I went ahead and put that in the freezer. I will be using that for stock. To go with it, we're pulling out some of the potatoes that we grew in the garden, and they are not quite completely thawed. So you're going to see in a minute, I'm going to pull up a piece and show you a nice ice chunk on there. I'm letting all of the water drain off of them. The cool thing about potatoes that have been in the freezer is that they actually get a little bit softer, so you don't have to wait on them to soften in the oven. You're really just waiting on them getting crunchy and getting brown. Now, as you can see, my little lady here loves to give extra hugs while we're in the cooking process, and I'm always willing to stop as long as I can keep some gross hands off of her. Right now, what we're doing is cutting up some onions to go in the pan with those potatoes. My kids love roasted onions. They get really caramelized and beautiful when I put them out on my sheet pans. And this week, I'm putting all of this together in a bowl, adding some seasonings and tossing them in oil to make sure everything gets really evenly coated. There's the ice I was talking about. But you don't have to do that. Like I showed you last week, you can just kind of toss it on the pan. Before I actually got this all together, I did take the chicken over to the stove and sear it off, which is the clip that you saw right at the beginning when I was flipping that big, beautiful chicken. I did it that way so that the skin would get nice and crispy before I put it into the oven. So at this point, I already have the chicken in the oven browning off and finishing its cook until it reaches an internal temperature of 165. The potatoes and onions are now ready to go in the oven, and as you're about to see in a minute, I totally forgot to put my second oven rack in. So once I get that added, I will throw all of this in the oven at the same time to finish cooking. The chicken did get done just a tiny bit sooner, but that's no problem at all because it needed to rest before we went ahead and cut it up. To go with, we're having a nice salad. My kids love iceberg. They love the nice crunch of it. So we're chopping up a little iceberg salad here to go with our food before we actually get it plated up on the table. This little one is always ready to celebrate a nice meal done, so a little high five is all it took to get her excited and ready to go. Here's that chicken I was telling you about. I always do make sure to temperature check in several different locations. I want to make sure that I'm getting the thickest part, and typically that's by the breast. But with the bone removed from the breast portion, I wanted to go ahead and check some other locations just to make sure that the legs were done in themselves, because the legs and the wings actually did keep their bones. I simply removed the middle rib cage portion of the chicken itself to make it go a little bit flatter with what we had going on there. So the chicken itself was a big hit, as you're about to see. I went ahead and plated up some for my little one. Typically, I would have moved this whole bird over to a nice wooden cutting board, but this night was really busy. We were actually trying to rush out the door. One of my nephews actually plays college basketball and had a game closer to us than ever. So I took the two boys and we went to watch him play. So extra dishes weren't going to be welcome, leaving them for somebody else to clean up. So here we are taking apart the bird. As you can see, with the bones removed, it comes apart really easily. Everybody in my family always fights for a good piece of skin, so I really have to sell up hard on the actual breast itself. I did kind of roll it around in the pan drippings to put it on the plates for some. The juice will actually sell them off on it. You're seeing my plate here. I had kind of a quarter with some onions and cream cheese. The kids really love theirs. You can see I actually have an extra kiddo at dinner tonight. That's one of my other nephews. He's actually headed off with us to the game. Before we go to the game, one last thing to do. The boys have ball games on Saturday. We usually just have one each, but this Saturday, for some reason, we had 2 games per child, every other hour, all day long. So we were going to a tiny little town that doesn't have a lot in the way of options for snacks and food, and concession stand food is not my bag, even if it's not during a pantry challenge. So here what you're seeing is I'm mixing up a marinade for some of their deer jerky that we like to make. They love using their deer jerky because they feel like, since they were part of the harvest of the animal, that they kind of have more of a stake in it. So while they are cleaning up the kitchen, I am tossing together this marinade. It has Worcestershire, soy, a little bit of low sugar ketchup, some honey, and I'm sprinkling in some pepper here as well. I'm going to give that a nice stir and then go ahead and get the meat in. And this recipe is actually from a dehydrating cookbook that you're seeing laid out there on the side. And I will make sure to link that down below, because it's really been a very nice resource to use with everything that we dehydrate, which we do quite often around here. I did forget to add my garlic cloves, so that's what you're seeing now. I'm just rubbing those in between my hands to get the skin loosened up, and then I'm just going to throw them in the marinade after I take a knife and actually smash them to kind of release the juices and make it all easier to blend into the recipe itself. It called for minced garlic, but I had no time to get that done, and I had to get this done before we left for the ball game because we were going to be home quite late, and the jerky itself needed a full day, or at least most of that time, to be able to get completed in the dehydrator before we left. So here it is adding in. I hope you guys have enjoyed a little peek into what we had going on. This is just Monday through Thursday. It was so busy. I just didn't feel like I could add the rest of the days in, so you might see that later in the week. We did have some absolutely amazing dishes, and we have a lot more planned coming soon. So I want to thank you guys for stopping by the Hometown Homestead. I appreciate each and every one of you. I've been overwhelmed by the number of you that have tuned into our pantry challenge from week 1 and subscribed to our channel. It really is amazing just what a boost it is for tiny little channels like mine when y'all do hit the like and subscribe. So I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart. I am just so proud of what's going on here with so many people getting inspired to cook new dishes and see how kiddos can help in the kitchen. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time, friends. Bye.